Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against her Hermes bag as the lawyer announced I'd inherited David's old farmhouse, the same property she'd called that dumpy shack at Thanksgiving. Her face went ashen when she realized the beach mansion and $300 million couldn't buy her way out of what was coming. 3 days later, I found the reason she looked like she'd seen a ghost. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me back up and tell you how a 68-year-old widow ended up discovering her son's murder while everyone else believed it was just a tragic accident. 2 weeks ago, my David died in a car crash on Highway 9. Single vehicle, late at night, no witnesses. The police called it driver fatigue. Victoria sobbed beautifully at the funeral, playing the grieving widow to perfection while wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension. I knew something was wrong when she insisted on a private burial. Just family, she'd said, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. David had dozens of friends who wanted to pay their respects, but Victoria claimed she was too fragile for a large service. The will reading was even stranger. David's lawyer, Mr. Patterson, seemed confused as he read the terms. The bulk of the estate, the tech company David had built from scratch, the beach house in Malibu, the investment portfolio, all went to Victoria. Fair enough, she was his wife. But then came the surprise. To my mother, Margaret Sullivan. I leave the family farmhouse in Pine Valley, along with all contents therein. She will understand its significance. I hadn't been to that farmhouse in 15 years. David bought it as a weekend retreat, but rarely used it. Victoria wrinkled her nose whenever it was mentioned, calling it rustic in a way that made the words sound like a curse. What exactly am I supposed to do with a rundown cabin? I'd asked Patterson privately after the reading. His expression was oddly serious. David specifically requested that you go there alone, Mrs. Sullivan. He said you'd know what to do. Victoria had been unusually eager to help me pack for my trip to Pine Valley. She even offered to have the house cleaned before I arrived, but something in her tone made me decline. If David wanted me to see something, I needed to see it exactly as he'd left it. The 3-hour drive gave me time to think about the son I'd apparently never really known. David had always been secretive about his work, claiming it was boring tech stuff whenever I asked. He'd grown distant over the past year, canceling our weekly dinners and avoiding family gatherings. I'd blamed Victoria's influence, but now I wondered if there was more to it. The farmhouse sat at the end of a winding dirt road, surrounded by dense pine trees that blocked most of the afternoon sunlight. It looked exactly as I remembered: weathered wood siding, wraparound porch, and that creaky front door that never latched properly. But as I stepped inside, something felt different. The air was stale, but not abandoned stale. Someone had been here recently. Very recently. The coffee pot was still warm. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the nearly full carafe that hadn't been there when David died 2 weeks ago. Unless the coffee fairy had taken up residence, someone had been making themselves at home in my inheritance. The smart thing would have been to call the police immediately. Instead, I did what any sensible grandmother with a backbone would do. I poured myself a cup and started exploring. Hey, if they were going to break into my house, they could at least make decent coffee. They did. The living room looked normal enough if you ignored the fact that David's reading chair was positioned to face the window with a clear view of the driveway, like someone had been keeping watch. A pair of binoculars sat on the side table, along with a notebook filled with license plate numbers written in David's familiar handwriting. The dates went back 6 months. The most recent entry was from the day before he died. Interesting hobby, David, I muttered, flipping through pages of meticulous observations. Apparently, my tech executive son had been playing detective in his spare time. The question was, investigating what? I found part of the answer in his bedroom upstairs. Hidden behind a loose floorboard under the bed was a metal box containing documents, photographs, and what looked like financial records. But not just any financial records. Bank statements showing massive transfers from shell companies, cryptocurrency transactions, and deposits that didn't match Victoria's explanation of David's successful tech business. The photographs were even more interesting. Victoria meeting with men I didn't recognize in parking garages, restaurants, and what appeared to be an offshore banking office in the Cayman Islands. All taken with a telephoto lens, all carefully dated and catalogued. David had been investigating his own wife. The most recent photo was stamped just 5 days before his death. Victoria shaking hands with a man whose face I recognized from the business section of the newspaper, Anthony Marchetti, currently under federal investigation for money laundering. I sat back on my heels, pieces of a very ugly puzzle starting to form. David's successful tech company was apparently successful at laundering money for some very unpleasant people. Victoria wasn't the grieving widow, she was his business partner. And David had figured it out. The sound of gravel crunching in the driveway made me freeze. A car was coming up the road, moving slowly like someone who knew exactly where they were going. I stuffed the most damaging photos and documents into my purse, replaced the floorboard, and made it to the living room window just as a sleek black sedan pulled up beside my ancient Honda. Victoria stepped out, no longer playing the fragile widow. She moved with purpose, checking her phone before approaching the house. She had a key. I had about 30 seconds to decide whether to confront her or hide. The smart money was on hiding, but I'd never been accused of being too smart for my own good. "Hello, Victoria," I said pleasantly as she walked through the front door like she owned the place, which, technically, she didn't. Lovely day for a drive to the country. She jumped about 3 feet in the air, clutching her chest with the kind of dramatic flair that would make a soap opera actress jealous. "Margaret, I didn't expect. I thought you were coming tomorrow." "Clearly." I gestured to the coffee pot. "Though someone's been expecting something. That coffee's still warm." Her eyes darted toward the kitchen, then back to me. I could practically see the gears turning as she calculated her next move. Victoria had always been beautiful in that cold, perfect way that made other women feel inadequate. But today she looked tired, stressed, like someone who'd been losing sleep over something more serious than grief. "I've been coming here to feel close to David," she said, tears appearing on cue. "This was our special place. Funny, he never mentioned bringing you here. In fact, I distinctly remember him saying you hated it." I settled into David's reading chair, noting how she flinched when I picked up the binoculars. "What exactly were you two looking for out here?" "Looking for?" Her laugh was pitched a little too high. "We weren't looking for anything. We just enjoyed the peace and quiet. With binoculars and surveillance notes?" I held up the notebook. David was keeping track of every car that came down this road for the past 6 months, including yours, it seems. 12 visits, always on Thursdays, always staying exactly 2 hours. The tears vanished. Victoria's mask slipped just enough for me to see the calculation underneath. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, Margaret." David was paranoid toward the end, obsessed with conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories like money laundering? Or conspiracy theories like faking financial records? I pulled out one of the bank statements I'd found. "This shows a deposit of $2 million from a company that doesn't exist, Victoria." David may have been many things, but paranoid wasn't one of them. She went very still. When she spoke again, her voice had lost all pretense of grief. "You need to stop digging, Margaret. For your own safety." "Is that a threat?" "It's practical advice from someone who knows more about this situation than you do." She moved toward the door, then paused. David was getting ready to do something very stupid, something that would have destroyed everything we built together. His death was unfortunate timing. The way she said unfortunate timing made my blood run cold. "Are you telling me my son's death wasn't an accident?" She smiled, and for the first time since I'd known her, it was completely genuine. "I'm telling you that accidents happen to people who don't know when to stop asking questions." After she left, I sat in the growing darkness, my mind racing. David hadn't just been investigating Victoria's business activities. He'd been building a case against her. All this evidence, carefully collected and hidden. He'd been preparing to expose whatever they'd been involved in together. But Victoria had realized what he was planning, and now she was inheriting everything while he was 6 feet underground. I pulled out my phone to call the police, then hesitated. What proof did I actually have? Photos and financial records that could be explained away. The word of a grieving mother against a bereaved widow with very expensive lawyers. No, I needed more evidence. And I had a feeling David had left more than just documents in this house. The basement was where David had always hidden his treasures as a boy. Baseball cards, comic books, and that bottle of whiskey he'd swiped from his father's cabinet when he was 16. I'd pretended not to know about his secret hiding spots. but mothers know everything. Apparently, some habits never change. The modern security system built into the basement wall was definitely not original to this 1940s farmhouse. Hidden behind what looked like an electrical panel was a sophisticated digital safe, complete with biometric scanner, and enough warning labels to stock a hazardous materials facility. David's thumbprint, of course, wouldn't open it. But he'd always been a belt and suspenders kind of kid when it came to backups. I found the manual override key exactly where I expected it, taped inside the old mason jar labeled Grandma's Cookies that had been my mother's. Some family traditions apparently ran deeper than money laundering and murder. The safe contained enough evidence to put Victoria away for several lifetimes. Financial records showing the systematic theft of millions from David's legitimate tech business to fund what appeared to be an international cryptocurrency laundering operation. Email printouts detailing meetings with known criminals. And a detailed timeline showing how Victoria had gradually taken control of every aspect of David's business while he was distracted by what he thought was their marriage. But the real prize was David's laptop, still logged in and containing his full investigation. Video files, recorded conversations, and a detailed confession he'd apparently been preparing to turn over to the FBI. The final video was dated the day before he died. David looked exhausted, speaking directly into the camera with the kind of resignation that comes from knowing you're about to blow up your entire life. If you're watching this, Mom, it means I didn't make it to my meeting with the FBI tomorrow. Victoria doesn't know about this safe, but if something happens to me, she'll come looking for the evidence I've been collecting. I need you to know that everything I did to protect you. He paused, running his hand through his hair in the gesture I'd seen him make since childhood, whenever he was struggling with a difficult decision. Victoria threatened you specifically, Mom. She said if I turned state's evidence, her associates would make sure you paid the price. I couldn't let that happen. But I also couldn't keep pretending I didn't know what she was doing. So I made a different plan. The video went on to explain how David had secretly transferred legitimate assets into my name months ago, using the farmhouse inheritance as a cover. Victoria thought she was getting everything, but most of what she'd inherited were shell companies filled with debt and federal seizure orders waiting to be executed. The FBI raid should happen within 48 hours of my death, David continued. I've set up an automated system to deliver all this evidence if I don't check in every 24 hours. Victoria will be arrested, her associates will be neutralized, and you'll be safe. The only thing I need you to do is stay away from the beach house until it's over. The timestamp on the video showed he'd recorded it 18 hours before his death. 18 hours before what Victoria called his accident. I sat back, absorbing the implications. My son had faked his own death to protect me and bring down his wife's criminal operation. Except something had gone wrong, because Victoria was still free and the FBI raid hadn't happened, which meant David's automated system had failed, and I was sitting on evidence that could expose the biggest money laundering operation the feds had seen in years. The sound of multiple cars coming up the driveway made me freeze. Through the basement window, I could see headlights, too many headlights, approaching the house. Apparently, Victoria had decided I was asking too many questions. 3 black SUVs in the driveway meant this wasn't a social call. I had about 2 minutes before they realized I wasn't answering the door and decided to invite themselves in. Enough time to make a choice that would either save my life or end it spectacularly. I grabbed David's laptop, stuffed the most incriminating evidence into a waterproof bag, and did something I hadn't done since I was 12 years old. I crawled out through the basement window. Thank goodness for small mercies and the fact that I'd kept up with my yoga classes at the senior center. Getting back in through that window was going to be considerably more challenging, assuming I lived that long. The woods behind the farmhouse were dense enough to hide in, but familiar enough that I wouldn't get hopelessly lost. David and I had hiked these trails dozens of times when he was young, back when he thought his mother was the smartest woman in the world instead of an obstacle to his criminal enterprise. From my hiding spot behind a massive pine tree, I watched Victoria direct her associates like a general commanding troops. They moved with professional efficiency, searching the house room by room. Not thugs. These were people with training and expensive equipment. One of them found the open basement safe within minutes. Victoria's voice carried clearly in the cold air as she screamed at them for being too late. Apparently, losing millions in evidence makes even the most composed criminals lose their temper. "She has everything," Victoria shouted into her phone. "David's laptop, the financial records, probably the video files. We need to find her before she gets to the FBI." The man she was talking to must have asked the obvious question about why they hadn't simply killed me already, because Victoria's response was illuminating. "Because we don't know what automatic triggers David set up. If his mother dies under suspicious circumstances, it might activate failsafes we haven't found yet. We need to recover the evidence first, then make it look like an accident. Just like we did with David." There it was. Confirmation that my son's death had been murder, delivered with the casual indifference of someone discussing the weather. I'd heard enough. Time to find out if David's backup plan had any backup plans. The hiking trail led to an old logging road that connected to the main highway about 2 miles from the farmhouse. My ancient Honda couldn't outrun their SUVs, but it might not have to. David had always been paranoid about cell phone tracking, so the laptop bag contained something I hadn't seen in years, a satellite phone. The contact list had only 3 numbers, one labeled FBI Morrison, one labeled Insurance, and one labeled Mom Emergency. I tried FBI Morrison first. A tired voice answered on the second ring. "Morrison. Detective Morrison? My name is Margaret Sullivan. My son David was supposed to meet with you 2 weeks ago about a money laundering investigation." Long pause. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'm sorry for your loss. David's death was a tragedy, but our meeting was cancelled when circumstances changed." "What circumstances?" "Ma'am, I can't discuss ongoing investigations, but if you have information related to your son's business activities, I'd be happy to meet with you tomorrow morning." "Detective Morrison, I'm currently hiding in the woods behind my son's farmhouse while his widow and several armed associates search for evidence that proves she murdered him." "Tomorrow morning might be too optimistic." Another pause, longer this time. "Mrs. Sullivan, where exactly are you right now?" I gave him the location, along with a brief summary of what I'd found in David's safe. Morrison's breathing changed as I described the evidence, and I could hear him typing rapidly. "Ma'am, I need you to stay hidden until we can get units to your location. We've been investigating Victoria Sullivan and her associates for 8 months, but we lost our inside source when David died. If you have his complete files..." "Detective, my son recorded a confession video saying he was going to turn state's evidence. He also said Victoria threatened to kill me if he testified. Does that sound like someone who died in an accident?" "No, Mrs. Sullivan, it doesn't. Stay on the line and keep moving toward the highway. We're coming to get you." Through the trees, I could see flashlights moving through the woods. Victoria's people had realized I'd escaped and were starting a systematic search. Professional or not, they were about to discover that hunting a 68-year-old woman in terrain she'd known for decades was considerably harder than it looked. But I had one more call to make first. Mom Emergency connected to a number I didn't recognize, but the voice that answered was beautifully familiar. "Margaret? Thank God. Are you safe? David?" My legs nearly gave out. I grabbed a tree for support, trying to process what I was hearing. "David, you're supposed to be dead." "I am dead, Mom. Officially. And it needs to stay that way for another few hours until the FBI finishes rounding up Victoria's network." "Are you somewhere secure?" The relief of hearing my son's voice was immediately replaced by the urge to strangle him. "Secure? I'm hiding in the woods behind your farmhouse while your homicidal wife hunts me with what appears to be a small army. How exactly is this part of your plan? It wasn't supposed to happen this way. You were supposed to find the evidence tomorrow, after the arrests were made. Victoria wasn't supposed to realize you'd been to the house." His voice was tense, strained. "Mom, I'm sorry. I never meant to put you in danger. Where are you?" "Federal protection. I've been working with the FBI for the past year to build a case against Victoria and her associates. The car accident was staged to make them think their inside source was gone. It was supposed to buy us time to collect evidence on the rest of the network." I could hear vehicles in the distance, moving along the logging road. Morrison's people or Victoria's reinforcements. Either way, my hiding spot was about to become considerably less secure. "David, I need to know, how many people are we talking about here? Because your wife just brought enough firepower to invade a small country." Victoria's organization launders money for 3 different criminal enterprises, including 2 that are on the FBI's most wanted list. They've killed people for less than what you discovered tonight. Wonderful. Any other encouraging news you'd like to share while I'm running for my life? Actually, yes. The cavalry should be arriving any minute now. I've been tracking your location through the satellite phone, and I've got federal agents converging on your position from 3 directions. And Victoria's people? Also being tracked. Mom, I need you to stay on the line and keep moving toward the highway. Don't trust anyone until you see FBI badges, and don't give up that laptop bag no matter what happens. Through the trees ahead, I could see flashing lights. Lots of them. Red and blue. Not the white searchlights Victoria's people had been using. Either the FBI had arrived in force, or Victoria had managed to steal some police cars. David, one more question. If this was all an elaborate plan to catch the bad guys, why did it feel like you were saying goodbye in that video message? The silence stretched long enough that I thought the connection had failed. Because I wasn't sure I'd survive the staging of my death, Mom. Victoria had been having me followed for weeks. If the plan had gone wrong, if they'd caught me before the FBI could extract me, his voice broke slightly. I needed you to know that everything I did was to protect you, even if it meant you'd hate me for lying. The sound of footsteps crashing through the underbrush was getting closer. Multiple sets, moving fast. I could never hate you, David, but next time you decide to fake your own death, maybe give your mother a heads up first? His laugh was shaky but genuine. Deal. Now keep moving, Mom. And remember, trust no one until you see Detective Morrison in person. He's 6'2", gray hair, and he'll know the password baseball cards in the mason jar. The flashing lights were definitely getting closer, and I could hear voices calling my name. Professional voices, using the kind of calm authority that suggested extensive training in hostage recovery situations. I was about to find out if David's elaborate plan had actually worked, or if we'd both just signed our own death warrants. But first, I was going to have a very serious conversation with my son about the definition of protecting your mother. Detective Morrison was exactly as advertised, 6'2", gray hair, and the kind of steady presence that suggested he'd talked more than one person down from very tall buildings. When he said, baseball cards in the mason jar, I nearly cried with relief. Mrs. Sullivan, we need to get you to a secure location immediately, he said, gesturing toward a black SUV that looked suspiciously like the ones Victoria had brought. Your son's evidence is more valuable than you realize. More valuable than exposing a multi-million-dollar money laundering operation? I clutched David's laptop bag closer. What exactly has my son gotten himself mixed up in? Morrison exchanged glances with his partner, a sharp-eyed woman who introduced herself as Agent Chen. Ma'am, your daughter-in-law isn't just laundering money. She's been funneling cryptocurrency to terrorist organizations overseas. We're talking about national security implications. I stared at them. You're telling me Victoria went from trophy wife to international terrorist financier? That seems like quite a career leap. According to your son's intelligence, she was never just a trophy wife. Victoria Marchetti, that's her real name, has been working for her father's organization since college. She married David specifically to access his tech expertise and use his company as a front. Agent Chen opened a tablet, showing me surveillance photos of Victoria meeting with people who looked like they stepped out of a crime thriller. She's been playing the long game for 8 years, slowly gaining access to David's systems and building a network of shell companies. And David figured this out? Eventually. But by then, she'd embedded herself so deeply in his business that exposing her would have meant destroying everything he'd built, until he found evidence that she was planning to eliminate him anyway. The SUV pulled into what looked like a federal building, complete with enough security measures to protect the Pentagon. As we walked through multiple checkpoints, Morrison continued briefing me on the situation. The problem is, Victoria's network extends beyond what David documented. We've been tracking payments to at least 15 different criminal organizations, including 2 that specialize in eliminating federal witnesses. Is that why you needed David to fake his death? It was his idea. Actually, he said Victoria would never stop hunting him if she thought he was alive, but if she believed he was dead, she'd focus on covering her tracks instead of eliminating threats. We entered a conference room where David was waiting, looking tired but alive and wonderfully familiar. I hugged him hard enough to crack ribs, then immediately started lecturing him about giving his mother heart attacks. I'm sorry, Mom, but we needed Victoria to feel safe enough to start moving money again. We've been tracking every transaction since my death, and tonight she's attempting to transfer $50 million to accounts in 3 different countries, which we'll be stopping, Agent Chen added, along with arresting everyone involved in the transfer. David pulled up financial records on his laptop. The beauty of Victoria's operation is that she documented everything. She couldn't resist keeping detailed records of her success. Every transaction, every meeting, every criminal contact. It's all in her private files. Files you accessed how exactly? He grinned. I designed her security system, Mom. She changed the passwords, but not the back doors. The pieces were finally coming together, but something still bothered me about the timing. Victoria had seemed genuinely shocked at the will reading when she learned about the farmhouse. If she'd been planning to eliminate David anyway, why hadn't she known about his preparations? The answer came from Agent Chen's next revelation, and it was considerably more disturbing than international terrorism. Mrs. Sullivan, we need you to understand that this operation is bigger than just Victoria. Her father's organization has been infiltrating tech companies across the country, using marriages and romantic relationships to gain access to systems and expertise. She pulled up a map showing dots across major cities. David's company was target number 12. Victoria was assigned to him specifically because his security software was being used by several banks we now know were being robbed from the inside. You're telling me my son was targeted for marriage by professional criminals? I'm telling you that Victoria Marchetti is what we call a honey trap specialist. She's done this before, at least 3 times that we can document. The previous targets all died in accidents after their usefulness ended. David's face went pale. You never told me about the other husbands. Morrison leaned back in his chair. We were hoping to avoid traumatizing you further, but given tonight's events, you need to understand what you're dealing with. Victoria's first husband died in a skiing accident after she drained his software company's bank accounts. The second died in a boating accident after she'd used his biotech firm to smuggle laboratory equipment overseas. And the third? House fire, made to look electrical, after she'd used his defense contracting company to steal military encryption codes. I felt sick. So David would have been number 4, except David figured it out in time. The problem is, Victoria's father's organization doesn't tolerate failure. When she couldn't deliver David's death and complete access to his systems, they sent reinforcements. The people who came to the farmhouse tonight? Among others. We've identified at least 12 operatives who arrived in the area over the past 48 hours. They're not just here to recover evidence, they're here to clean up loose ends. David stood up suddenly, pacing to the window. Mom, there's something else. The reason Victoria was so shocked about the farmhouse inheritance wasn't because she didn't know about it. It's because she thought I'd hidden something else there. What kind of something else? The master key to her father's entire network. Financial records. Contact lists. Operational details for every criminal enterprise they're connected to. I told her I'd created it as insurance, but I never told her where it was hidden. Agent Chen's eyes sharpened. Does this master key exist? Oh, it exists. And it's not hidden at the farmhouse. David turned to me with an expression I recognized from his childhood. The look he got when he was about to reveal he'd been 3 steps ahead of everyone else the whole time. Mom, remember how I always hid my most important things in the last place anyone would think to look? I thought back to all the times I'd found his treasures hidden in plain sight. You hid it at home. Your real home. Not just at home. I hid it with the person Victoria would never suspect of being involved in any of this. The realization hit me like a physical blow. It's at my house. You hid it at my house. In Grandma's cookie jar, to be specific. The same jar where I used to hide my allowance money. Victoria's met you dozens of times over the years, and she's never seen you as anything more than a harmless old woman who bakes cookies and asks when she's going to have grandchildren. Agent Chen was already reaching for her radio. We need a team at Mrs. Sullivan's residence immediately. Wait, Morrison held up a hand. If Victoria's people realize what David hid there, they'll tear the place apart looking for it. Mrs. Sullivan, is there any chance they'd think to search your home? I considered this. Victoria had always been condescendingly polite to me. treating me like a relic from David's past that had to be tolerated but never taken seriously. She'd visited my house exactly twice in 8 years of marriage, both times spending the entire visit checking her phone and making excuses to leave early. "No," I said slowly. "She thinks I'm a harmless old widow who spends her time watching game shows and watering houseplants." "Then we have an advantage she doesn't know about," Morrison said. "But we need to retrieve that information before she figures out where it is." David shook his head. "It's too dangerous. I won't put Mom at risk again." "You won't be putting me at risk," I said firmly. "I'm volunteering." Going back to my own house felt surreal after everything that had happened. The FBI had stationed agents in the neighborhood, but they were invisible, hidden in landscaping trucks and parked in driveways like visiting relatives. To anyone watching, I was just a grieving mother returning home from a difficult day of settling her son's affairs. The cookie jar sat exactly where it had been for the past 15 years, on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker, unremarkable, overlooked, and containing what might be the most valuable intelligence the FBI had gathered in years. David hadn't been exaggerating. The tiny USB drive hidden among the ceramic cookies contained financial records that read like a directory of international crime. Names, account numbers, operational details, and enough evidence to dismantle criminal networks spanning 3 continents. "Your son is either brilliant or completely insane," Agent Chen said through my earpiece as I downloaded the files to a secure FBI laptop. "Possibly both. He gets that from his father," I replied. "The brilliant part anyway. The insanity is all mine." I was just finishing the file transfer when my home security system chimed. Someone was at my front door. The FBI surveillance team's voice crackled through the earpiece immediately. "Mrs. Sullivan, stay calm. We have visual on 2 individuals approaching your front door. One appears to be Victoria Sullivan." Through the peephole, I could see Victoria standing on my porch, looking every inch the bereaved widow. She was alone, except for one man in an expensive suit who looked like he belonged in a boardroom rather than breaking into suburban homes. "Mrs. Sullivan," Morrison's voice was tense, "do not answer that door. We're moving agents into position now." But I was already turning the deadbolt. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts, and my instincts were telling me that running and hiding weren't going to solve this problem. "Hello, Victoria," I said pleasantly, opening the door with the same warm smile I'd been using on unwelcome visitors for decades. "This is a surprise. I wasn't expecting to see you again so soon." Her smile was equally warm and twice as false. "Margaret, I hope you don't mind the intrusion. This is my attorney, Mr. Reeves. We were hoping to discuss David's estate with you." "Of course. Please, come in." I stepped back, noting how her eyes immediately began cataloging my living room, looking for something specific. Mr. Reeves was considerably less subtle. He moved through my house like he was conducting an inventory, examining everything from my bookshelf to my houseplants with professional interest. "Margaret?" Victoria settled onto my sofa, her posture perfect and her tone honeyed with false concern. "I realize today has been overwhelming for you. Finding David's things at the farmhouse, dealing with all that confusing paperwork." "It has been quite a day," I agreed, pouring tea from the pot I'd prepared before their arrival. "Though I have to say, some of David's papers were more interesting than confusing." Her hand paused halfway to her teacup. "Oh? Financial records mostly. Investment accounts I didn't know he had. Business partnerships that seemed rather international." I watched her face carefully. I had no idea David's business was so diversified. Mr. Reeves had stopped pretending to admire my china cabinet and was now standing directly behind my chair. Professional bodyguard positioning, I realized. Victoria wasn't just here to chat. "Margaret, some of those papers might be sensitive business documents that should be returned to David's lawyers, for legal reasons." "I'm sure you're right. In fact, I've already taken care of that. I turned everything over to the FBI this afternoon." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my kitchen clock ticking from the next room. Victoria's mask didn't slip, but something shifted behind her eyes, a calculation being rapidly recalculated. "The FBI?" Her voice remained perfectly controlled. "Whatever for? They said there might be irregularities in David's business practices that need investigation, something about international transactions and money laundering." I sipped my tea innocently. "I'm sure it's just a formality. Victoria's laugh was like breaking glass, sharp and dangerous. "Oh, Margaret, you have no idea what you've done." Mr. Reeves moved closer, and I noticed he'd positioned himself between me and the front door. Whatever warm family conversation Victoria had planned, it was over. "I know exactly what I've done," I said calmly. "I've helped expose a criminal organization that murdered my son." "Murdered?" Victoria's eyes went wide with theatrical shock. "Margaret, David died in a car accident. You were at the funeral." "I was at a funeral for an empty casket, Victoria. Or should I call you Victoria Marchetti? I understand that's your real name." This time her mask didn't just slip, it shattered completely. The grieving widow vanished, replaced by someone cold and calculating and genuinely dangerous. "You stupid old woman," she said softly. "Do you understand what you've cost me? What you've cost my family? Your family of international criminals? I'd say I've cost them exactly what they deserved." Mr. Reeves pulled out his phone, speaking rapidly in what sounded like Italian. Victoria stood up, no longer bothering to maintain her facade of politeness. "David was supposed to die quietly, and you were supposed to grieve quietly, and none of this was supposed to involve federal agents." She began pacing, her perfect composure cracking with each step. "But you couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? You threatened to kill me if David testified against you. Did you really think I'd just let that slide? I threatened you because David needed motivation to keep his mouth shut. But he was always too sentimental about family." She paused by my mantelpiece, picking up a framed photo of David as a child. "It's ironic, really. His love for you is what made him so easy to manipulate in the beginning, and it's what made him so dangerous in the end." "Dangerous how?" Victoria smiled, and for the first time since I'd known her, it reached her eyes. "Because he thought faking his death would protect you. He thought if I believed he was dead, I'd take my money and disappear. But David never understood the family business." She set the photo down carefully, like she was handling something precious. "We don't leave loose ends, Margaret. We never have." Mr. Reeves finished his phone call and nodded to Victoria. Whatever he'd arranged, she looked satisfied. "The good news is, this will all be over soon. The bad news is, you're going to have a very unfortunate accident." I looked around my living room, noting the positions of FBI agents I couldn't see but knew were there. Victoria and Mr. Reeves were standing in front of the window, perfectly positioned for the surveillance cameras hidden in my neighbor's tree. "Before I have my unfortunate accident," I said conversationally, "would you mind satisfying an old woman's curiosity?" "About what? How long have you been planning this? The marriage to David, the money laundering, all of it?" Victoria glanced at Mr. Reeves, who checked his watch and nodded. Apparently, they had time for one last villain monologue. 12 years, she said. "I spent 4 years in computer science classes, learning everything I needed to understand David's work. 2 years building a fake identity and backstory. Then 6 years of marriage, slowly gaining access to his systems and his trust. And you never felt anything for him? Not even a little?" Her expression softened slightly. "David was kinder than I expected, more genuine. There were moments when I almost regretted what I had to do. Almost. But business is business, Margaret, and family is family." Mr. Reeves moved toward me, and I knew our conversation was over. Whatever the FBI had planned, it needed to happen now. "Just one more question," I said quickly. "If you've been planning this for 12 years, how did David figure it out?" Victoria's smile turned triumphant. "He didn't figure it out, Margaret. We told him." That stopped me cold. "What?" "6 months ago, my father's organization decided David had served his purpose. We told him exactly who I was, what I'd been doing, and what was going to happen to him." Her eyes glittered with malicious pleasure. "We wanted him to know that everything he'd believed about his life was a lie. The cruelty of it took my breath away. They hadn't just planned to kill David. They'd wanted him to suffer first. That's when he contacted the FBI," I whispered. "That's when he signed his own death warrant," Victoria corrected. "And yours." Mr. Reeves reached into his jacket, and I closed my eyes, thinking of David and hoping the FBI's timing was better than mine had been. The sound I heard wasn't gunfire. It was my front door exploding inward as federal agents flooded my living room like an avenging army. Victoria dove behind my sofa, Mr. Reeves spun toward the agents with his weapon drawn, and I did what any sensible grandmother would do in a shootout. I hit the floor and stayed there. The entire confrontation lasted maybe 30 seconds. When the shouting stopped and I opened my eyes, Victoria was in handcuffs and Mr. Reeves was being read his rights by Agent Chen. "Mrs. Sullivan," Morrison helped me to my feet, checking me for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "Only my pride," I said, brushing dust off my cardigan. "Though I have to say, your timing is impeccable." David burst through the front door, followed by what appeared to be half the FBI's field office. He gathered me into a hug that lifted my feet off the ground. "Mom, when I heard they'd cornered you here, I thought, you thought your mother was too old and helpless to handle a couple of international criminals?" I pulled back to look at him sternly. "David Sullivan, I raised you better than that." He laughed, tears streaming down his face. "You're right. I should have known better." Agent Chen approached with a satisfied expression. "Mrs. Sullivan, I need you to know that your cooperation tonight has helped us arrest not just Victoria and her associate, but 12 other members of their organization. The evidence your son collected, combined with what we gathered from tonight's operation, should put them away for life. And the master key files? Downloaded and secure. We've already begun tracing their financial networks and notifying international authorities." I looked over at Victoria, who was sitting in my kitchen chair with her hands cuffed behind her back. Even in custody, she maintained that perfect posture, though her mask had finally fallen away completely. She looked exactly like what she was, a predator who'd finally been caught. "Victoria," I called to her. She looked up with an expression of pure hatred. "I have one final question." Agent Chen started to object, but I held up a hand. This was important. "Did you ever, even for a moment, actually love my son?" She stared at me for a long time, and I saw something flicker across her face. Pain, maybe, or regret. "Yes," she said quietly, "and that was my biggest mistake." As they led her away, I realized that answer was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. Later that evening, after the FBI had finished processing my house as a crime scene and David had been officially resurrected from the dead, we sat on my back porch drinking coffee and watching the sunset. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now you get to be a normal grandmother again," David said. "No more international conspiracies, no more fake deaths, no more criminal masterminds trying to kill you." "Sounds boring," he laughed. "Mom, most people would consider that a good thing. Most people haven't spent the last week discovering that their ordinary lives were anything but ordinary." I sipped my coffee, thinking about everything that had happened. "David, why did you really choose to fake your death instead of just going into witness protection?" He was quiet for a long time. "Because Victoria told me that if I testified against her, her organization would torture you to death to make me watch. I couldn't risk that." "Mom, I couldn't risk you. So you chose to let me think you were dead instead." "I chose to protect you the only way I knew how." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "Next time, maybe we could try just talking about it first." "Next time, I promise to involve you in the planning stages." "There'd better not be a next time." "David Sullivan." He grinned. "Well, I can't make any promises. After all, I get my sense of adventure from my mother." I looked out at my quiet suburban neighborhood, thinking about how ordinary it looked and how extraordinary the last week had been. Victoria had been right about one thing. I was just a harmless old woman who baked cookies and watered houseplants. But she'd been wrong about everything else. Harmless didn't mean helpless, and ordinary didn't mean defenseless. And sometimes, the most dangerous enemies are the ones who underestimate the power of a mother protecting her child. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.